Hey guys, what's up? This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos. And today I want to talk to you guys about Heraclitus and his conception of the Logos. So this is the first video in a new video series that I want to do in regards to tracing the development of the idea or the development of Logos theology, Logos philosophy from the pre-Socratic period up to the Stoics, up to Philo, up to Plato, up to Aristotle, and eventually to St. John the Theologian, St. John the Evangelist, the Apostle John, the author of John's Gospel, and him writing in Arche in Hologos. And so I may make a couple videos after that in regards to discussing the kind of reception of Logos, the term, maybe how it was discussed post the establishment of Christianity. I'm not positive how many videos are going to be in this new video series, but this is the type of content you can expect in the next week or two, because the central thrust of this YouTube channel is essentially the proclamation, celebration, defense of Logos theology and its immense import for me in terms of rediscovering, for me, the most logical, the most important kind of theological perspective out there on the religious supermarket, if you will. So because that is the main thrust of this YouTube channel, obviously it would be important to construct a series of videos where you can refer back to this idea and how it developed in Western civilization. So that's what you can expect in the next coming week or so. Let's just dive into it. So today we're going to talk about Heraclitus, the weeping philosopher or the obscure. Heraclitus lived from 535 to 475 BC, okay? And he is a pre-Socratic philosopher. We don't actually know a whole lot about his youth. So Heraclitus, what we do know is he was born to an aristocratic family. We know that he gave up his family inheritance and essentially gave it to his brother, and his brother kind of took over whatever his family did. I'm not sure if they were in politics or business or merchants or what exactly they did, but they were an aristocratic family in Ephesus. So, side note here, Ephesus is actually really interesting because Ephesus is the same city where the author of the Gospel of John, St. John, that's where he goes after Christ descends to evangelize, to convert people, to spread the good news. So how ironic that the gentleman who we kind of attribute to one of the crowning figures in terms of the development of the idea of Logos or Logos theology, Logos philosophy, was from the same city that John, the author of the gospel that discusses Christ as Logos, and then uses kind of Old Testament references to hammer how this has always been the case, was actually evangelizing in the same city this gentleman was from. So that was a bit of a side note, a little bit of a tangent, but it is interesting. So Heraclitus, the reason why he was called the weeping philosopher is because he's kind of famously known for considering humanity to be unconscious, and that people were walking around in essentially a daze. They're unconscious, they're unaware. He can be described as a misanthrope. So, he was a bit of a loner. He was a bit of an oddball. He kind of always went against the tide, if you will. And to some degree, we're actually thankful that he did, because being a pre-Socratic philosopher, he lived in a cultural milieu in which philosophers were typically always oral. So as you guys know, Plato recorded the ideas of Socrates because Socrates didn't write anything down. And the emphasis on memory in Greek culture, being a great orator, being a great storyteller, great philosopher, people always wanted to show off how great of a memory they had. Well, Heraclitus, being the oddball that he was, he actually wrote most of his ideas down at a time where most people didn't. So because he wrote his ideas down, his conceptions, his ideas were able to exert a tremendous influence on the Stoics and Plato and Aristotle and Philo and later Greeks and post-Christianity. I mean, Heraclitus has been an important influence, especially in the field of philosophy. So why was he? Before we get there, so like I mentioned, we don't know a whole lot about him as a child. We don't know exactly his education. According to himself, he described himself as a self-taught philosopher in search of wisdom, that he was kind of this incredible wisdom figure, but he claimed he was self-taught. Now, we don't know that, given that he grew up in an aristocratic family. Most likely, he had a good education growing up. We know that Diogenes has referred to him as sort of a wondrous child, and that maybe he was very gifted intellectually as a young man. That's what seems to be the case, but as I say, we really just don't know a lot about him, other than that he was from this family, the city that he was from, and then everything we know as an adult from his writings or what he said about himself. So why Heraclitus is such an important figure in philosophy, although it relates to his idea of logos, which I'll get at here in a second. Mostly his main contribution is in regards to his conception of change, his ideas that the universe itself is always changing, that nothing is stagnant. So he's famous for the quote that no man steps in the same river twice, meaning that the water flowing is always flowing, and you'll never be able to essentially interact with the same water molecules, the same water, like it's all flowing. And this is the nature of reality, this is the nature of time, this is the nature of life, nations, cities, history, that everything is changing, everything's moving, everything is in flux. And in Greek, that's called pantheire. And pantheire is that's essentially translated to all flows. And this is the famous idea that he's associated with. So because of this continual change, him and Parmenides are considered to be the sort of forefathers of the field of ontology within philosophy. And ontology deals with the state of being. And from my understanding, Parmenides had a more of a static conception of being as such, where Heraclitus, because he had this fundamental notion that everything is changing, he believed that it was more of a becoming. And so that's why those two figures are kind of held up to be the fathers of ontology, because Heraclitus is more of this becoming figure, that you're never fully being, but you're always becoming more and more of maybe who you are. I'm not exactly sure how he would phrase that. Whereas Parmenides had more of a fixed notion of being. And so these two figures, Heraclitus, Parmenides, the fathers of ontology, the branch of philosophy dealing with the nature of being. Now, given his incredible emphasis on everything changing, this is where his notion of logos comes in. Because for Heraclitus, the logos is what is unifying all these opposites. That the logos is the thing, the non-static, if you will, aspect of the ever-flowing, the ever-changing nature of life. So, for Heraclitus, the logos was essentially the organizing principle of the universe. And then he really strongly associates it with language and the word. And therefore, he associates it with logic and reason. So right there, you can see how, from the videos I've made previously, from the discussions we've had, that describes a lot of what I emphasize about the logos: order, language and words, and then reason and logic. And so right there from the beginning, in the, let's see, we'd be talking about the 400s BC, essentially, the early 500s, late 400s BC, Heraclitus is already using this term. Now, I don't want you to get the notion that Heraclitus is the first person to discuss logos. That is actually not the case. Logos was already existing in the Greek language. It was already an idea that was being battered around by different philosophers. It's just that Heraclitus wrote his ideas down, and therefore that's who we traditionally trace this idea to. Knowing, though, always having a footnote that he wasn't the first person to come up with this idea. But he was the first person to write about it and make it a fixture in his world philosophy. So the logos is kind of the fundamental principle in which everything arises from. And for example, this quote right here, the path up and the path down are one and the same. This kind of hints at how Heraclitus is understanding logos. And for Heraclitus, he associated logos symbolically with fire. So if some of you guys might know that these Greek philosophers, they were always trying to figure out what was the kind of crucible element in which everything arose from. So you have people like Thales claiming it was water, people like Anaximenes claiming it was air, and then Heraclitus claiming it was fire. Now, fire is a very interesting choice, and it kind of coincides with his idea of change because fire is never static. Fire is never the exact same thing. Every fire is different. It's always changing. But at the same time, the essence of fire is always the same. So you can see how that would be important, or how that kind of would connect for Heraclitus. So, like I said, the logos is always kind of unifying opposites for him. And language was a big deal. So from my readings, I grabbed some books from the library to try to do some background information, some research for this video. And a few of the excerpts that I was reading of Heraclitus were really interesting in how he would discuss the unification of opposites in words specifically. So one of the examples he gave was the word bio, which is where we get, it means life. That's where we get biology, biosphere. And he was noting how bio in Greek is also, again, I'm not positive. I can read a little bit of Greek, but I don't know the word for bow, like bow and arrow. And he was making the point that the Greek word for bow, I guess it's bio as well, and how the same word can have two different meanings. That the same word can mean life, while at the same time can insinuate something which is for death, the bow and arrow. And so you see how, again, the logos is this fundamental principle that is always uniting of opposites. And now, in regards to the religiosity Heraclitus ascribed to the logos, that is a debated topic, because sometimes he's referred to as an atheist, sometimes he's referred to as a pagan, but the kind of religiosity he describes to the logos, if it changes. So in some instances you'll read where he says that the logos was never created, it was not created by gods, it just always is. At other times, the way he talks about the logos is kind of very reminiscent of almost Christian theology. He's talking about how it's this divine principle, it's the unifying principle of the universe, that all is one. This is something that he's also famous for saying. So I have a handful of little quotes here that I wanted to read from Heraclitus, and then I also, at the end of this video, wanted to read a little section from St. Justin Martyr, one of the early church fathers, who actually makes a case for Heraclitus, Socrates, Plato, and some of these Greeks actually being Christians before Christ. And I'll get to that in a second. But I wrote down some of these kind of synonyms. So for Heraclitus, I mentioned that it's kind of the organizing principle, that he really focuses on organization, language, and reason and logic. So I wrote down some synonyms that I kind of got from Heraclitus and how he understood the logos. So that is word, account, principle, plan, formula, measure, proportion. So you can kind of see this emphasis on organization, which is going to be different from the way Christians kind of start to describe the logoi and the logos, where truth becomes a central kind of synonym, love, honor, these types of things. So that hasn't been kind of read into the logos yet. We're just focusing on order, logic, reason, language. So anyways, here's a few quotes from Heraclitus. Listen not to me, but to the word, or to the logos. For it is wise to agree that all things are one. So this is a big deal for Heraclitus, is that everything is a unity. So he does kind of have a monistic conception of reality, and it is the logos that is holding everything together. Here is another quote of his. This one's a little bit longer. The logos holds always, but humans always prove unable to understand it, both before hearing it and when they have first heard it. For though all things come to be in accordance with this logos, humans are like the inexperienced when they experience such words and deeds as I set out, distinguishing each in accordance with its nature and saying how it is. But other people fail to notice what they do when awake, just as they forget what they do while asleep. So this idea, people don't know what they're doing while awake, just as much as they don't know what they did while they're asleep. Again, hinting at why he's the weeping philosopher, that he felt everybody was unconscious. And so it's, another quote here, I don't know if I've already read this one, but all entities come in accordance with the logos. And this idea, so that quote right there, all entities come in accordance with the logos, you can see how that is picked up in regard to the Christian message that logos is the divine order of the universe, and you're either getting with it or you're against it. And this refers to your morality, this refers to your worldview, this refers to your religion, this refers to, your philosophical interpretation. I mean, all this stuff, everything has an order. Everything has a more ideal state. Not using, Platonic idealism or anything like that, but just that everything has a fundamental order to it. And so everything, all entities come in accordance with the logos. So I want to read here the passage from Justin Martyr. But I also want to point out that Catholics, they were quick to try to disassociate themselves with Heraclitus because, again, he was associated with paganism, he was associated with atheism, this type of stuff. Whereas one of the early church fathers, St. Justin Martyr, he was emphatic about this idea of logos. And I learned this stuff, and I read his first apology, which is what I'm getting ready to read. In fact, I have a copy on my computer in a PDF form. You guys can probably find it online, but if any of you want me to send you my copy, you can email me at churchoftheeternallogos, all one word, @gmail.com, and I can send that to you if you want. If not, you can do your own Google search and try to find one online. But it is interesting because St. Justin Martyr, even though in later councils and the development of Christian theology, he may hold ideas and interpretations that people aren't very fond of. I love how he was so emphatic about this logos, and because people lived lives rationally, logically, and were focused on trying to discover, uncover, articulate what it is the logos was, he believed them to be Christians because Christ is the incarnation of the logos. And that's why Christ gives us this unique moral message that didn't exist, and nobody else has come and said the same thing. I mean, he is, whether you believe Jesus of Nazareth to be a divine figure or not, everybody has to recognize that his moral message is unique on the planet. This isn't the detachment of the Buddha. He's all about kind of getting into the world and helping people. And so his idea that you have to love your neighbor as yourself, to me, this is almost like the psychedelic revelation where you realize everybody's one, or I mentioned in the video, Worship the Creator, not the creation, how people have taken, the New Age, hippies, spiritual people have taken this notion of the I am that's in the Old Testament, and then Christ says that he is the I am, this sort of self-awareness as this unifying principle. Well, to me, this is almost like what psychedelics or what enlightenment or, going into the woods and being by yourself for months on end or being a Taoist up on the mountain. This is the realization. The realization is that we are all one, and Christ came and gave us, the moral message. But anyways, enough about that. It's on my computer, so let me just find this real quick. Okay, here we go. So I was going to read, again, this is from St. Justin Martyr, and his work called The First Apology. So this is from the section on the Word in the world before Christ. And I'm going to skip 4 lines down, and I'm going to read the rest of the paragraph to you guys. But listen to how he was trying to make cases. And if you read this document, you'll see in other areas where he is trying to make the case for multiple Greeks being precursors to Christianity. In the section that I'm going to read, he only mentioned Socrates and Heraclitus, but like I said, if you guys want this document, email me, I'll send it to you. But he mentions a lot of different people. So anyways, this is St. Justin Martyr, the Word in the world before Christ. We have been taught that Christ is the firstborn of God, the begotten. And we have declared above that he is the Logos, of whom every race of men were partakers. Again, this organizing principle. Logos has been organizing civilizations. The Logos, of whom every race of men were partakers. And those who lived reasonably are Christians, even though they have been thought atheists, as among the Greeks, Socrates and Heraclitus, and men like them, and among the barbarians, Abraham, Ananias, Azarias, and Misael, and Elias, and many others whose actions and names we now decline to recount because we know it would be tedious. So that even they who lived before Christ and lived without reason were wicked and hostile to Christ and slew those who lived reasonably, right? So the way that Socrates was killed represents this sort of archetype of Christ that when you come and speak truth, the world will persecute you. He's connecting this to Socrates, the same thing that happened to Christ. Those who live reasonably, those who live according to the Logos, but who, through the power of the Logos, according to the will of God the Father, the Lord of all, he was born of a virgin as a man, and was named Jesus, and was crucified, and died, and rose again, and ascended into heaven. An intelligent man will be able to comprehend from what has been already so largely said. And we, since the proof of this subject is less needful now, will pass for the present to the proof of those things which are urgent. So, very interesting that how he connected, again, these Greeks who were uncovering, articulating, discovering the Logos because they chose to live reasonably, because they held themselves to their own standards, their kind of moral, logical standards, and then they chose to speak truth, which then allowed them to be persecuted by the world. They were Christians for St. Justin. So very interesting stuff. That kind of concludes this video. That's really all I had to say to you guys. And actually, 22 minutes. This is a longer video than I was anticipating. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. This is the first video in a series of videos I'm going to do trying to talk about the development of Logos. The next video, I believe, will be on the Stoics. So that's what you can expect. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you know anybody who would be interested in these videos, please point them in this direction. Please share the videos. If you do anything, I would ask that you please share them just so we can get more people kind of in the conversation and discussing things. So anyways, thank you guys for all the love and support. I truly appreciate you guys that are always commenting on the videos, that are just, that give very insightful responses, but also are just engaging and appreciate what I'm trying to do. So thank you guys so much. I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. I love you guys. And as always, until next time, God bless.